Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Will it play Battlefield 1 at 1080p low detail on the new Ryzen 5 2400G $170 APU? Yes, it will, and it actually plays very well. It's not the prettiest in the world when set to low detail, but take a look at our real-time frame rate. No, it's not at 60 frames per second, but it's darn close. Considering that Battlefield 1 is A, not that old, and B, a fairly demanding game in multiplayer. Note, I'm not testing this in single player. This is a big multiplayer map. It's actually running pretty well. We are graphics card limited for the most part. Faster graphics would of course run this better, but considering that these are integrated graphics on an APU, wow, I'm genuinely impressed. Linked down in the video description below will be a link to the full playlist of all the Will It Play videos and a playlist of just the Ryzen 5 2400Gs if you just want to see the games. Here you can scroll through it, one video per game, pick out the games you want to see how well they perform. At the end of each of these videos is a chart, but I think that the live gameplay is far more important than a chart. If charts were the end-all be-all of benchmarking, I would just make one video, show a bunch of charts, and say there it is. But you'll find in a lot of my Will It Plays videos that the chart looks worse than the gameplay is, or vice versa. A couple of times I've seen near 60 frames per second, but the performance of the machine is actually still not that great due to input lag and just due to sluggishness in general. So this actually shows you what real gameplay will do. You can see the real-time performance numbers in the upper left-hand corner. We are using nearly 2 gigabytes of VRAM, which is what's set in the BIOS. We are using 99% of the integrated graphics chip, so that is in fact the primary limitation, but the CPU is still using a lot. I did not record one of these for the Ryzen 3 2200. Battlefield 1 in multiplayer needs 8 threads, or at least it needs 6 threads. It will run in 4, but it's rough. Those of you who had a previous generation 4-core 4-thread i5 and have upgraded to something newer know exactly what I'm talking about. The average frame rate on a 4-core 4-thread chip seems okay, but you don't know what you're missing until you've gone to something better. The smoothness, the frame pacing and delivery makes all the difference in the world. Now, I do have the graphics chip set to 1250 megahertz and the CPU is locked to 3800 megahertz. The motherboard that I'm using for all of these benchmarks is, shall we say, it hasn't received an updated BIOS since the launch of the Ryzen chips, and sometimes the clock speeds are stable and they're proper, and sometimes they're not. I showed that on the Ryzen 3 2200. So for now, until we get another BIOS update, I just set the clock speeds in the BIOS. These are effectively the stock speeds. It has a 3.7 base, 3.9 turbo, so 3.8 is roughly in the middle, and 1250 is the stock speed to the Vega 11. I will have a separate overclocking video talking about my experiences there. I have 3 different APU chips, and I've tested them on 2 different motherboards and played around with overclocking. More on that in a future video. Main system RAM usage is just over 3.6 gigabytes. I've noticed that when I've started testing games at low detail, main system RAM usage has lowered. Lower textures, lower details to load in. When I've done my previous benchmarks with dedicated graphics cards, I've commented that AAA games really do need 16 gigs of RAM. This game absolutely will use up to 10 gigs of RAM just for the game for 1080p Ultra or 1080p high detail, but it's using way less at low. I've already filmed, you may or may not have seen it yet, an 8 gig versus 16 gig video on these, but the short version is 8 gigs is actually enough for 1080p low detail. It's 1080p higher Ultra where you really want the extra main system RAM. So if you're looking to put together a budget machine and 16 gigs just isn't affordable, you can get away with 8. It's tight, you'll use it all, but 8 will work for now. In just a minute, we're going to cut to the benchmark chart, but the short version is if you're looking at playing games at 1080p at low detail, or perhaps 720p at medium to high detail, this $170 APU with integrated graphics does an amazing job. No, it's not as good as a dedicated graphics card. Yes, an RX 580 or a GTX 1060 would be far preferable to this. Both of those would run this at 1080p ultra detail without any complaints whatsoever at over 60 frames per second. But currently in February of 2018 when I'm recording this, those are kind of expensive. This represents a very value-oriented compromise that will let you play games without spending a fortune on a graphics card. 57 frames per second average, 42 frames per second, 1% low, 33 frames per second, 0.1% low. This was completely playable. No, it wasn't 60 frames per second butter smooth 100% of the time, but considering the hardware involved, this genuinely did surprise me. I was impressed. Controllability, responsiveness of the controls, moving the character around, switching weapons, all of that was just fine. If this was the only computer that I could afford and I wanted to play Battlefield 1, yep, it does it. I wouldn't have a problem with it. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with that big huge red button directly below. Post your comments below the video and check the video description for links and details. Links to Amazon and Newegg for both of these APUs, the Ryzen 3 and the Ryzen 5. Links to my full playlist of Will It Play. Links to all of the Will It Plays for this particular APU and a bunch of other stuff down there. Please check them out. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.